It was created in 1911 by financier and noted trust organizer, father of trusts, Charles R. Flint through the consolidation of 4 companies: the Tabulating Machine Company, International Time Recording Company, Computing Scale Company of America, and the Bundy Manufacturing Company. Located in Endicott, it was renamed International Business Machines in 1924. The individual companies of Center continued to operate using their established names until the businesses were integrated in 1933 and the holding company eliminated. They manufactured a wide range of products, including employee timekeeping systems, weighing scales, automatic meat slices, and punched card equipment. The companies to be consolidated: the Tabulating Machine Company. The Tabulating Machine Company, founded by Herman Hollerith, specialized in punched card data processing equipment. Hollerith's series of patents on tabulating machine technology, first applied for in 1884, drew on his work at the U.S. Census Bureau from 1879 to 82. Hollerith was initially trying to reduce the time and complexity needed to tabulate the 1890 census. His development of punched cards in 1886 set the industry standard for the next 80 years of tabulating and computing data input. In 1896, the Tabulating Machine Company leased some machines to a railway company, but quickly focused on the challenges of the largest statistical endeavor of its day, the 1900 U.S. Census. After winning the government contract, and completing the project with amazing speed, Hollerith was faced with the challenge of sustaining the company in non-census years. He returned to targeting private businesses both in the United States and abroad, attempting to identify industry applications for his automatic punching, tabulating and sorting machines. Flint bought the business for $2.3 million in 1911. Computing Scale Company of America. The Computing Scale Company of America was a holding company, organized in 1901 and consolidating as subsidiary companies: the Computing Scale Company, Dayton, Ohio; the Money Weight Scale Company, Chicago, Illinois; the W.F. Simpson Company of Detroit, Michigan; and the Stimson Computing Scale Company of Elkhart, Indiana. In 1891, Edward Canby and Orange O. Ozias, 2 businessmen from Dayton, Ohio, purchased the patents for the newly invented computing scale and incorporated the Computing Scale Company for the production of commercial scales. Bundy Manufacturing Company. The first time clock was invented on November 20, 1888, by Willard Bundy, a jeweler in Auburn, New York. A year later, his brother, Harlow Bundy, organized the Bundy Manufacturing Company, and began mass-producing time clocks. In 1900, Bundy Manufacturing sold its time recording business to a new company, the International Time Recording Company. Bundy Manufacturing went on to produce adding machines. In 1906, Harlow Bundy moved his business into a new 3-story brick building in Endicott, New York. International Time Recording Company. In 1894, L. Willard and F. A. Frick of Rochester, New York, formed the Willard and Frick Manufacturing Company as the first card time recorder company in the world. In 1900, George W. Fairchild, an investor and director of the Bundy Manufacturing Company, led the formation in Jersey City, New Jersey, of the International Time Recording Company, which consolidated the time recording business of Bundy with the Willard and Frick Manufacturing Co. In 1901, the company was reincorporated in Binghamton, New York. The same year, it acquired the Chicago Time Register Co., the first autograph time recorder company in the world, and a manufacturer of key, card and autograph employee time recorders. In 1906, ITR relocated to Endicott, New York, where it had built a larger factory next to the new building of the Bundy Manufacturing Company. Before the center consolidation, Harlow Bundy would be named ITR's treasurer and general manager. The first dial recorder was invented by Dr. Alexander Day in 1888, and in 1907 ITR acquired the Delray Register Company. In 1908, ITR acquired the Syracuse Time Recorder Company, a manufacturer of dial recorders. ITR's 1935 catalog lists a wide variety of clocks, from industrial time clocks, recording clocks, and program clocks, to ornamental storefront clocks. It also lists the Series 970 intercommunicating telephone system. Since 1907 or earlier, ITR had published a magazine, Time, for employees and customers. In 1935, IBM renamed the magazine Think. The consolidation. Flint consolidated the four companies into the new Center Holding Company. Center had a bonded indebtedness of $6.5 million, 3 times its current assets, of which $4 million was borrowed from the Guarantee Trust Company. Flint assigned it a value of $17.5 million, while its tangible assets only added up to $1 million. Flint stated that the various products were similar but not identical, and that the consolidation, instead of being dependent for earnings upon a single industry, would own 3 separate and distinct lines of business, so that in normal times the interest and sinking funds on its bonds could be earned by any one of these independent lines, while in abnormal times the consolidation would have 3 chances instead of 1 to meet its obligations and pay dividends. CTR's 1911 stock prospectus reported a modest $950,000 in consolidated net earnings for the 4 companies. Organization and leadership. The 4 consolidated companies had 1,300 employees and offices and plants in Endicott and Binghamton, New York, Dayton, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Washington, D.C., and Toronto, Ontario. Center was located in Endicott. The chairman was George Fairchild, who, having been a member of Congress since 1906, was not expected to take an active part in management. When the first president left after just 1 month, however, Fairchild took over and ran Center until 1912, when Frank N. Candolph, formerly CEO of the International Time Recording subsidiary, took over. Flint was a member of the board of Center until his retirement in 1930. Hollerath, then 51, joined the Center board and served as a consulting engineer until he retired 10 years later. Early Watson-era Thomas J. Watson Sr., along with 29 other NCR officials, had been convicted in 1913 of various antitrust violations for their roles in a widespread national cash register scheme to run used cash register retailers out of business. Watson's own extortionate writings were used as evidence against him. That lesson taught Watson to thereafter keep very little in writing. In 1914, having been fired from NCR Corporation and with a prison sentence threatening his future, Thomas J. Watson approached Flint, a leading financier, for assistance in finding a similar job. Despite his apparently perilous situation, he was still very clear as to the type of job he wanted. He had already turned down a number of offers. He wanted control of the business for himself, and to be able to earn a share of the profits. Flint offered him Center. Flint was, as described earlier, the great promoter of trusts and was presumably less worried about Watson's impending jail sentence. The other members of the Center board were less sanguine, asking who was to run the company while he was in prison. As a result, they only gave him the title of general manager. After Watson had been at Center for 11 months, the appeals court ordered a retrial. Although he refused to sign a consent decree, a new trial never took place, and he was duly promoted by the board of Center to the position of president. Watson brought to Center from NCR the motto Think. Watson's strategies. Surprisingly, in view of his past record at NCR and his later colossal influence on IBM, he initially maintained a very low profile for the next decade until 1924, when the chairman George W. Fairchild died and he finally took over sole control. For the whole of the previous decade, in some ways uncharacteristically, he consistently deferred to Flint, Fairchild and Hollerith. In the meantime, he took personal charge of 400 demoralized and poorly supervised salesmen. His stated objective was to produce a sales force in the NCR mold, as well as advanced machines that would be superior to any of the competitors' machines. In a series of small meetings, he presented his competitive proposition to the sales force. Despite the aggressive-sounding title, right from these beginnings there was as much emphasis on the ethics and philosophies of the business as there was on sales techniques. In particular, he stressed sincerity, integrity and loyalty, saying that they should do nothing that could be construed as unfair competition, and should conduct themselves in an honest, fair and square way, something which would be radical even today. Musical events, even IBM songs, were introduced to improve and maintain employee morale. The other philosophies that motivated Center and IBM for the next 3/4 of a century were also evident. The company motto was to be, "We sell and deliver service." Center was to be in the business of genuinely assisting its customers. Watson strongly believed that when a sale was made, both sides came out ahead. Organizational change and strategies. Center was a company with 3 separate elements. Computing scale was always a problem, and the largest element of this was eventually sold off in 1933 to Hobart Manufacturing. Time recording was then still the main revenue earner, and was used by Watson as a vehicle for diversification, though none of these was great success. The piece of the action that most interested Watson, perhaps because it was closest to his NCR experience, was the tabulating business, and this was where he directed much of his attention, and by the early 1930s this had indeed become the largest piece of Center. Returning to the 1920s, though, while still under Fairchild's domination, Watson went for a significant degree of growth. This saw revenue grow from $4.2 million in 1914, when he took over, to the peak of $16 million in 1920. The price of this, however, was a precarious cash position, and when in 1921 sales fell to $10.6 million, he faced a cash flow crisis. Once again, Center was to be funded, and indeed rescued, by Guarantee Trust. Watson was forced to cut costs across the board, including reducing R&D and laying off some employees. He never again allowed his cash position to fall so low. He subsequently maintained a policy of low dividends, high revenues and careful cost controls. He adopted very conservative accounting principles. Hollerith, beginning with the 1890 census, had rented his machines so that his company could provide the maintenance necessary to assure reliable operation. Watson recognized other benefits and in particular took on board the idea that renting equipment was inherently more stabilizing, since the income continued when equipment orders would otherwise have dried up. Less obviously, it forced sales personnel, aware that they might lose the rental, to maintain regular contact with customers, thus ensuring, even as early as the 1930s, that customer relationships were well managed. This approach became central to IBM's activities. Thereafter, Watson deliberately lagged on the introduction of new products, but not on research. Even after competitors launched, he still waited until the market was ripe for large-scale development. Watson recognized the importance of sound R&D, appointing James W. Bryce in 1922 to manage this. However, Watson continued to be personally involved in R&D, not least through his insistence on rigorous standards. Watson had never liked the clumsy hyphenated title of the Center, and chose to replace it with the more expansive title International Business Machines. first as a name for a 1917 Canadian subsidiary, then as a line in advertisements. For example, the McClaw's magazine, V53, May 1921, has a full-page ad with, at the bottom, International Time Recording Company of New York, subsidiary of Computing-Tabulating-Recording Company. New York, makers of international business machines. Patterson had died in 1922 and Fairchild died December 31, 1924. At the age of 50, Watson, at long last, came out of the shadows to mold the company in his own image, and for the next quarter of a century until he was 75, he led it to greatness. He celebrated his new status with the first quarter-century club. Even though Center had only been going for 13 years, he based qualification on the subsidiary companies. The holding company itself disappeared in 1933 when most of the subsidiaries had been merged into one company, IBM.